Labour, far from the party of workers, it seems they are now the party of slum landlords. Now, Jas Athwal, Labour MP, was in the news a couple of weeks ago after it was revealed that he was a landlord with a portfolio of 18 properties, making him the biggest landlord in the Commons. Now, that in of itself surprised some, as most would have expected the largest landlord to come from the Conservative Party. But he's been in the news again after it was uncovered that he wasn't the best landlord either, and that's putting it mildly. His tenants, whom with some he shares the same constituency with, have been complaining about the poor conditions of his properties. A BBC report was released after investigations correspondent Joe Pike went to these flats himself. In one block of 7 flats owned by Mr. Athwal, nearly half the tenants said they had to regularly clean their bathroom ceilings to remove mould. On top of the black mold, the BBC saw evidence of ant infestations in a number of the 7 properties. The ants are everywhere, one resident said, pointing to insects climbing up a doorframe. There are on my kids' body and on their clothes. Another resident said they have been threatened with eviction by letting agent if they complained about problems in their flats or started claiming benefits. Now, as you can see, these are some of the pictures Joe Pike took when he was at the properties, which is disgusting, if you ask me. But it's not just the poor conditions these renters are subjected to. They face intimidation and are threatened if they speak out. When I visited the properties, which are above an empty shop in Ilford, the communal areas were dirty and the lights did not work. Fire alarms were hanging loose from the ceiling, and a washing machine had been dumped next to a set of stairs. I knocked on every door and spoke to most of the tenants. None wanted their name to be used. Some specifically said this was due to a fear of being evicted. Please don't use my name, said a resident. Finding a new flat is very difficult. Most of the people I spoke to said Mr. Athwal and his property manager were slow to respond to complaints or were completely unresponsive. While I was at the block, the property manager was tipped off about my visits and tenants started to get calls from him. After receiving these calls, they became hesitant about talking to me. This appeared to me to be intimidation. One resident had spoken on camera about problems with the flat, later asked that we not use the interview, and another asked me not to use images of the mold 2 days after, allowing me to take pictures of it. Now, initially, Athwal completely downplayed the investigation and said, there's nothing wrong. In his first response to the BBC, Mr. Athwal did not respond to a request for interview, but said, my properties are managed by an agency selected for their quick response times and excellent customer service. This is evidenced by the long tenure of the tenants, over 87 years across 15 properties. I pride myself on being a good landlord, and no tenants have ever been evicted. Repairs and improvements have been made to properties as recently as 2 years ago. To ensure tenants enjoy a secure, long-term home, rents are kept below market rates, and in many cases, rents are frozen at the rate first agreed. He added he did not take on tenants on housing benefit to avoid conflicts of interest with his role as the local council leader. Now, it's very interesting that, he talks about not taking on tenants with housing benefits to avoid conflict of interest. And I love how he says, I'm a good landlord. I've not made anyone homeless yet. I mean, way to set the bar incredibly low. Also saying that he must be good because tenants are stuck around. I mean, clearly he's completely out of touch. Tenants would more likely move if it was easier to find another property, or the fact, it's their home. They would like the issues to be fixed rather than be upended every 6 months to a year. Just an incredibly out of touch thing to say. Now, after much backlash, as you would expect, Athwal changed his tune just a little bit, and instead of downplaying the issue, he decided to apologise, but still, within the apology, he doesn't take full responsibility. I'm shocked and sickened by the series of problems that have come to light. I had not been aware of these issues until this week, for which I'm furious. I have immediately dismissed the managing agent of my properties. As the landlord, the buck stops with me, and I unreservedly apologise to my tenants for the unacceptable experiences they have endured. I will be reimbursing every tenant that is out of pocket for repairs or renewals they have had to undertake. I will be conducting a survey of my tenants so that all issues are uncovered, and I'm confident each one is living in secure, comfortable homes. So he apologises and says, the buck stops with me. However, he goes on to say that he had no idea about any of this, and he fired the property managers. Cog, pretty astonishing. What do you think should happen to Jas Athwal?
Well, I think he should not be suspended. I think he should stay exactly where he is because he represents exactly the problem with Starmer's Labour. He represents the issue that Starmer's Labour has, where it has, like Macron, rejected the left, and now it has to deal with what it's left with. Right? It has to deal with people like Jas Athwal that it has catapulted into positions of power simply to satisfy a feud with the left. Morgan McSweeney, Luke Akehurst, all of these figures who've got a very petty, vindictive student politics argument against anyone even vaguely left wing. And now the kind of politics they've created is just open to exploitation. It's open to people who, far from embodying the values of the Labour Party that we used to associate with the Labour Party, far from embodying the idea of like workers' rights, of Fabianism and social democracy, and standing up for the people at the bottom. Now we've got people like Jas Athwal, who clearly they might say that that they're supporting workers. They might say that they are might say that they are of the left. But I think there's a fundamental contradiction there between what they're saying and what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that there was some controversy when Athwal became the candidate for Ilford South, and it was previously held by Sam Tarry, who was seen on the left of the party. He was sacked from the shadow cabinet by Keir Starmer for standing on a picket line. He was then subsequently deselected, although Tarry said at the time that he believed there was dodgy practices that led to the deselection. Now, the media, they're going to just sort of isolate this. It's a Jas Athwal issue, right? But they're missing the bigger picture. Now, what we do is to look at the entire thing. This isn't an isolated issue with one MP, but rather a systemic change within the Labour Party where they seek to represent not renters, not workers, but people with a lot of capital. Jas Athwal exists because Keir Starmer's Labour Party exists, and you pretty much alluded to that. Actually, it's quite refreshing to hear you say he shouldn't resign or be suspended because he's right at home, and that's exactly you've hit the nail on the head there, haven't you? But I thought it was funny that he refused to take on tenants who are claiming housing benefits due to a conflict of interest. I mean, him being a landlord is a conflict of interest. How can he represent renters? When they have less rights, well, if they have less rights, if they have less regulation, that literally benefits him. And he's an MP who writes our laws. I mean, some of his tenants live in the same constituency. So imagine, just think about this, being a tenant in Ilford South, and you go to one of his surgeries and complain about your living conditions, and the guy who's meant to do something about it is your bloody landlord. Cog, what do we need to do as a society to change things holistically to deal with the crisis of being a private tenant? If Athwal were to resign, which I think he should, but you kind of make the case that he should stay where he is because he's right at home. That doesn't change anything, does it?
I think there are big questions about the general state of housing in this country, but I do just want to go back slightly, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Because the story with Sam Tarry and Jas Athwal goes back a little bit further than that, to the 2019 general election. So this is the reason that I'm telling this story is because centrists will try to use this to misrepresent what happened. So in 2019, on the week of the selection vote, Jas Athwal was finally suspended after a considerably long investigation by an independent body, which was investigating him for serious allegations of sexual assault. Now, he was cleared of these allegations, to be very clear. He was cleared of these allegations. That's not what's up for question here. But at the time, Wes Streeting, our friend Wes Streeting, friend of the show, Wes Streeting, accused the Corbyn's Labour and Sam Tarry, who was was also in that race, of setting up a stitch up. They said, oh well, Jas Athwal is being stitched up by this investigation, and regardless of the outcome of the investigation, I think it's worth noting, if you're going to argue that that both Jeremy Corbyn and Sam Tarry openly, it's a matter of record, called for the selection vote to be suspended at the time, right? So that more candidates could enter the ballot, so that it wouldn't just be slanted in favour of Sam Tarry because the right's most popular candidate had been removed from the process by an independent investigation. But of course, people on the right, Wes Streeting in particular, will say that this is, that was the left stitching up Jas Athwal, and then they'll say what we're doing is just like for like. We are stitching up elections, but it's okay because the left did it first. It's a misrepresentation. The left did not do it first. That Jeremy Corbyn actually went out of his way to intervene in the process in order to stop the vote. And support the BAME politicians who were concerned that Jas Athwal was being sidelined, and they reopened the vote on Jeremy Corbyn's and Sam Tarry's request, and Sam Tarry still won. So I think it's always worth going over the right-wing argument for Sam Tarry is that this feud started a long time ago and Sam Tarry started it, and going, that's not quite true. As for landlords, sorry, long answer. Hierarchy is always going to be the issue, right? The problem isn't that individual landlords are good or bad. Yeah, individual landlords are good or bad. Some of the nicest people I've known, I've known as a person, have been landlords. They're perfectly lovely people. But of course, the problem is that they're set up in a system that is designed for exploitation. It's just designed that way. What I'm thinking about at the moment is the sort of Robin Hood analogy, right? You've got King Richard, who's supposedly the good king, and Prince John, who's the baddie, who rules England and charges everyone too much tax and all that stuff. But that's only possible under a feudal system, right? The problem there is not Prince John is bad, and if King Richard was in charge, it would be good, because if King Richard's son, happened to be a tyrant, then it would be just as bad again. The problem is you have to break the system that allows landlords or kings to have power over people in this way. And one of the ways you do that is not by making Jas Athwal personally resign. I think actually he's a great representative, as I said, of what Keir Starmer's Labour looks like. Instead, it's to invest in quality social housing for different income brackets, for all different income brackets, and eventually move us to a world without landlords, because we should have a world without landlords, because, it's not a job. It's just not a job. It's not an occupation. Owning something is not a job. You work for jobs.
That was a very good explanation to the system. And I know that a lot of people will accuse the left of just saying, oh, you hate all landlords. And that's a misrepresentation of our argument. We're talking about the system. We don't want people to be in a position where they can rent out for private gain. And of course, when you create that system, you do create a lot of bastards. And I would be comfortable saying that majority of landlords probably aren't decent people. They're not evil like some, but I don't think they're necessarily decent. And there is, of course, some who are, but that's it's about the system, and you've perfectly laid that out. But of course, I agree with you. If you ask me, private landlords should not exist. I mean, the only form of renting should be by the state. I think it's rented out at cost price or as close to it as possible, and not a single person should be making a profit from housing. And to go further, I mean, we should completely decommodify housing. All housing should be free. And no, this isn't some crazy policy. We can afford it. Housing is a human right. Being left to the market, now that is crazy.
Patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.